Commander, the signal is breaking apart.
Put it on screen and lock down all channels.
The chief adjudicator of the interstellar concordance had reached the 9th word of the sentence that would erase an entire species from galactic law when the broadcast died. Not faded, not glitched. Died mid-syllable the way a candle dies when a hand closes over the flame, and for 3 full seconds the largest audience in recorded galactic history, some 400 billion sapient beings across 11,000 worlds, stared at a wall of gray static where the face of adjudicator Perrin Oskthane had been a heartbeat earlier, her mouth still open around a consonant that no one would ever hear her finish. Then the static resolved into something else. A single line of text rendered in the blocky, unadorned characters of a data protocol nobody in the Concordance's broadcast division had used in over 4 decades. Characters that belong to a species every archive in the galaxy currently classified as gone. Source verification failed. Transmission origin sole compact military frequency. Stand by. And then the feed cut entirely, and the galaxy sat in silence, staring at nothing, trying to understand how a dead civilization had just interrupted its own funeral. 11,000 light-years from the Concordance's central forum, in the long cold shadow thrown by a black hole the old star charts called the Hollow Gate, and the handful of people who still lived near it called something far less official, Dr. Ren Ashcombe was 300 meters down inside a derelict warship's spine, elbow-deep in 90-year-old wiring, when her wrist display lit up with an alert she had spent 11 years hoping never to see. Reactor core resonance detected, transmission event logged, origin this vessel. She went very still, the way a person goes still when they realize the floor beneath them has just become something other than solid ground. No, she said to no one because there was no one down here to hear her. No, 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 you were supposed to be dead. The ship around her, a Compactera heavy cruiser called the Meridian's Promise, had been dead for 4 decades. Her hull cracked open along the dorsal spine like a fruit split by a careless hand, her reactor cold. Her crew long since either evacuated or lost to whatever had happened to them in the chaos of the cascade. Ren had spent the better part of 2 years mapping her corridors meter by meter, cataloging what remained, the way she had cataloged 41 other wrecks scattered across the debris field that orbited the Hollow Gate at a respectful permanent distance. It was careful, quiet, patient work, the kind of work that let a woman disappear into her own grief for years at a time without anyone asking uncomfortable questions. And in 11 years, not one of those 41 ships had ever, not once, transmitted anything. Ren pulled herself hand over hand back up through the access shaft, her suit lights throwing long, jagged shadows across bulkheads scarred by whatever catastrophic failure had ended the Meridian's Promise's service life in a single afternoon 4 decades ago, and did not stop moving until she reached the reactor control gallery she'd been excavating for the past 6 weeks. The core itself sat dark and silent in its cradle, exactly as it had every day since she'd first found it. But the diagnostic panel beside it, a panel she had personally confirmed was non-functional during her very first survey of this compartment, now glowed with a faint amber light that had absolutely no business existing. She stared at it for a long moment, her breath loud inside her helmet, and then she did the only thing 11 years of careful, disciplined survival had trained her to do when the impossible happened. She called home. Threadneedle, this is Ashcombe, Authentication Kestrel 9 Ren, I need Director Calloway right now. Tell him it's about the Meridian. The response took 11 seconds, an agonizing 11 seconds during which Ren stood in the amber half-light of a ship that should not have had power, listening to her own pulse. Ren, Calloway's voice when it came, carried the particular flatness of a man forcing himself to sound calmer than he felt. Owen Calloway had been the closest thing to a father Ren had left since the Cascade took her actual one, and in 11 years she had learned to read every shade of worry hiding underneath his careful command voice. Tell me what happened. The core resonated, just for a second, maybe less, before it went dark again. Owen, the diagnostic panel logged an outbound transmission. Compact military frequency, encrypted, automated, the kind these old cruisers used to burst send position telemetry back to Fleet Command during the war. She swallowed. It sent something, I don't know what, I don't know how far it reached. The silence on the other end of the channel stretched long enough that Wren began to wonder if the connection had dropped. Owens, I heard you, he said, and now the comms was gone entirely, replaced by something older and colder, the voice of a man who had spent 40 years building a hiding place stone by careful stone and had just watched a single crack open in its foundation. Get back to Threadneedle. Now, don't touch anything else on that ship, don't run another diagnostic, don't so much as breathe near that reactor again. If that burst reached far enough to be caught by anyone outside the debris field, we are about to have a very difficult conversation with people we have spent 4 decades making sure never came looking for us. Wren was already moving, sealing the compartment behind her, retracing 11 years of careful, invisible footsteps back toward the tiny shuttle she'd left docked at the Meridian's ruptured airlock. Owen, she said again, quieter this time, what if it's not people looking for us? What if it's them? She didn't need to say who them was. In the hidden colony that called itself Threadneedle, tucked into a gravitationally stable pocket close enough to the Hollow Gates event horizon that conventional sensors read the region as an impossible dead zone, everyone over the age of 50 carried the same memory, worn smooth from 4 decades of not talking about it. The Cascade. The moment humanity's entire interconnected civilization, ships, colonies, orbital infrastructure, every piece of network technology the Sol Compact had ever built, began failing simultaneously, silently, catastrophically, as though some vast unseen hand had reached into the wiring of an entire species and simply turned it off. Calloway didn't answer her question directly, which was, in its own way, an answer. Get back here, he said instead. We'll figure out what we're dealing with together. 600,000 light-years away, in the chambers of the Concordance's Crisis Council, a very different kind of fear was taking hold, quieter but no less consuming. Investigator Esthala Rook of the Ithacari Continuity Office had been in her quarters aboard the survey vessel Clarion's Reach. Halfway through a report she had genuinely believed was the least eventful assignment of her 14-year career, when the emergency recall came through. She was an unusual choice for crisis work, by her own admission and everyone else's. Her specialty was archival verification, the dry, methodical business of confirming that historical records matched physical evidence before the Concordance formally closed the book on anything. She had been assigned to observe the Extinction Declaration precisely because it was supposed to be a formality, the final procedural step in a process that had been underway, slowly and with exhaustive legal care, for nearly a decade. Explain to me, Rook said, standing before the Crisis Council's holographic display 40 minutes later, her 4 eyes tracking independently across the frozen frame of that impossible line of text. How a civilization we have had zero verified contact with for 41 years just interrupted a live galactic broadcast using its own military encryption protocols. We don't know, said Counselor Vem Dashari, the Concordance's senior broadcast security officer, a Thren official whose composed exterior did nothing to hide the tightness in his voice. The signal originated from deep within the Sol Compact quarantine zone, an area no Concordance vessel has entered in over 3 decades due to the Standing Hazard Advisory. The Hazard Advisory, Rook repeated. The one based on the assumption that whatever destroyed human infrastructure 41 years ago is still active in that region. Correct. So either something inside that quarantine zone is still transmitting on dead military frequencies purely by accident, some derelict system with enough residual power to fire once after 4 decades of silence. Rook said slowly, thinking it through as she spoke, the way she always did, or there are people in there operating that equipment on purpose, which would mean the extinction declaration we were 30 seconds from finalizing is not merely premature. It's wrong. Nobody in the room answered her immediately, and in that silence, Rook understood, with the particular clarity that came from a career spent verifying uncomfortable truths, exactly what kind of assignment she was about to be handed. "I want the Clarion's reach retasked," she said, before anyone could suggest it and make it sound like their idea instead of hers. "I want to go into that quarantine zone and find out which one it is, because I am not going to be the officer who signs off on erasing a species from galactic law based on an assumption we apparently never actually verified." Counselor Dashari studied her for a long moment. "You understand the risk. If the Cascade event that crippled the Sol Compact is still active in that region, we could lose the Clarion's reach the same way we lost the 2 survey drones we sent in 8 years ago." "I understand." "The risk of not going better," Rook said. "Counselor, 400 billion people watched that broadcast. If it turns out humanity survived and we declared them extinct anyway because it was easier than checking, the Concordance's credibility will not survive that revelation, whatever we find out there. I would rather risk one ship than that." It took the Council 11 hours to authorize the mission. 11 hours during which the recording of that frozen, unfinished broadcast played on a continuous loop across every major news channel in Concordance space, sparking a swelling tide of public speculation that ranged from cautious hope to outright panic, because whatever else the interruption had done, it had planted a single unbearable question in 400 billion minds at once. What if they were wrong? The Clarion's reach departed Concordance Central Space 30 hours after the broadcast cut, carrying a crew of 9 and investigator Esthala Rook, who spent most of the 11-day transit reviewing every scrap of surviving Sol Compact history she could access. Trying to understand a species, the Concordance had spent 4 decades filing away as a tragic footnote. What she found troubled her more with every passing hour. The Sol Compact, in the decades before the Cascade, had been an ambitious, expansionist, occasionally reckless young interstellar power, barely 2 centuries removed from its own homeworld, still stumbling through the same growing pains every young spacefaring species endured. And 42 years ago, according to the sparse surviving records, a joint compact scientific and military expedition had ventured into the gravitational shadow of a black hole system on the furthest edge of their claimed territory, chasing anomalous energy readings that suggested the presence of ancient pre-concordance technology. They had found something. The records were frustratingly incomplete on exactly what, fragmented, contradictory, some describing a dormant structure of unknown origin, others describing an active intelligence that had responded to the expedition's presence with what one surviving fragment, translated imperfectly from corrupted compact military logs, described only as total and immediate refusal. 11 months after that expedition's final transmission, the Cascade began. Every compact ship's navigational computer, every colony's life support grid, every piece of networked human technology across dozens of systems began failing within the same 72-hour window. A cascading collapse so total and so fast that the compact's government, military, and communications infrastructure ceased functioning almost simultaneously. Whatever the expedition had disturbed near that black hole had not simply refused them. It had, in the space of 3 days, unmade the technological backbone of an entire civilization. The Concordance, watching from a cautious distance, had waited, sent probes eventually when the silence stretched past a decade, lost 2 of them to whatever still lurked in that quarantined region, waited longer. And eventually, reluctantly, exhaustively, after 4 decades of watching a species produce no further communication, no further activity, nothing but silence stretching into permanence, had begun the long legal process of declaring the Sol Compact extinct, not out of malice, Rook understood now, reading the actual proceedings for the first time instead of the summary she'd absorbed secondhand, but out of a kind of institutional grief, a slow, careful, Well-intentioned mourning for a species, the Concordance genuinely believed it had failed to save in time. "We were wrong to wait so long to check," Rook said quietly to her ship's small crew as the Clarion's reach crossed into the outer edge of the quarantine zone. The hollow gate's gravitational signature, already bending their sensor, returns into strange, distorted shapes. "Or we were right to be afraid, and we're about to find out which." Back at Threadneedle, that fear had already been living for 4 decades, worn into the architecture of the place itself. The colony was not a city in any conventional sense. It occupied a series of interconnected habitats built into the hollowed interiors of 3 derelict compact Terra colony ships, positioned in a gravitationally stable region close enough to the hollow gate that the black hole's own mass-distorted sensor readings from any distance into unreadable static. A natural cloak that Owen Calloway's predecessors had discovered by desperate accident in the earliest, most chaotic months after the Cascade, and had spent 4 decades since carefully, deliberately maintaining. Just under 3,000 people lived there now, the survivors of that first terrified exodus and the 2 generations born since, raised on stories of a wider galaxy most of them had never seen and had been taught from childhood to fear. Wren had been 9 years old when her father, a compact fleet engineer named Desmond Ashcombe, had carried her aboard the last evacuation shuttle out of a dying colony, one of hundreds of ships fleeing inward toward the only region of space where the Cascade's reach seemed to falter, drawn by rumors and desperate mathematics toward the gravitational shadow of a black hole nobody sane would normally choose to live near. She remembered almost nothing of the years before. She remembered everything about the years after. The cold, the rationing, the endless drills, her father's hands shaking every time he worked on ship systems for the rest of his too short life, terrified that whatever had unmade the Compact's technology once might reach out and unmake it again. He had died when she was 17, not from the Cascade, just from ordinary human failure, a heart that gave out one evening while he was teaching her to read old reactor schematics. And Wren had thrown herself into archival work in the years since with an intensity that everyone around her recognized correctly as grief wearing the costume of purpose. She catalogued the dead. She mapped the wrecks. She learned everything the archives could teach her about what had happened to her civilization, in the desperate, half-conscious hope that understanding it might someday let her stop being afraid of it. She had never expected to be the one who woke it up again. "Talk me through exactly what you did," Calloway said, 3 hours after her return, the 2 of them standing in Threadneedle's cramped situation room while a dozen senior colony officials watched the amber diagnostic readout Wren had pulled from the Meridian's Promises dead systems. "Standard survey protocol. I've run the same diagnostic sweep on that reactor gallery a dozen times over 6 weeks without incident. Today I isolated a secondary control junction I hadn't accessed before, ran a passive integrity check, nothing active, nothing that should have drawn power from anywhere." Wren shook her head, still turning it over, still hunting for the mistake she was certain she must have made. "The core wasn't even warm, Owen. There's no way it had enough residual charge to transmit anything after 40 years cold." "Unless it wasn't cold," said Dr. Priya Anand, the colony's chief systems engineer, an intense, precise woman who had been Wren's mentor since her earliest days in the archival program. "Unless something's been maintaining minimal charge in that reactor for years, quietly below any threshold your survey equipment was calibrated to detect, and your integrity check simply completed a circuit that was already most of the way toward active." The room went very quiet. "Are you saying someone's been out there?" Calloway said slowly. "I'm saying something has," Anand said. "And Owen, I don't think it's people. Old military reactor cores don't hold a maintenance charge for 4 decades without active management. Nothing biological did that. And if you're asking whether I have another explanation, the honest answer is I don't have one I like." Wren felt something cold settle into her stomach, an old, familiar fear from childhood stories she'd never quite believed and never quite stopped believing either. You think it's still there. Whatever the expedition found, you think it's been out here this whole time. Nobody answered her, which was, again, its own kind of answer. We need to know, Calloway said finally, whether that transmission reached anyone outside the debris field. If it did, we have to assume the Concordance is going to send someone to investigate, and we need to decide right now, tonight, what we do if that happens. Do we hide deeper? Do we run? Or do we finally, after 40 years, let someone find us? The debate that followed lasted until dawn, and Wren, exhausted, sat through most of it in silence, listening to 3 generations of survivors argue over a decision none of them had ever actually expected to have to make. The oldest colonists, the ones who remembered the cascade firsthand, argued overwhelmingly for deeper concealment, for burying Threadneedle so completely that no signal, no accident, no curious archivist's careless diagnostic sweep could ever risk exposing them again. The younger generation, the ones born in hiding who had never seen an open sky that wasn't projected on a habitat ceiling, argued with a passion that surprised even Wren for the opposite, for finally reaching out, for finding out after 4 decades of assumed extinction whether there was still a galaxy out there willing to remember them as something other than a cautionary tale. Wren didn't speak until nearly the end, when Calloway, exhausted, finally turned to her directly. "You found the signal," he said. "You've spent more time out among the wrecks than anyone alive. What do you think we should do?" She thought about her father's shaking hands, about 17 years of watching an entire generation live in the shadow of a terror none of them fully understood because the people who'd survived it couldn't bear to explain it clearly, about 41 years of silence that had cost humanity every relationship, every alliance, every scrap of standing it had ever built among the stars. "I think," she said slowly, "that we've spent 40 years hiding from a threat we've never actually confirmed is still hunting us. I think we built our entire lives around an assumption, and I think assumptions like that have a way of outliving the reasons for them. I don't know what's out there near the Meridian's reactor core, but I know that if we keep hiding forever, we'll never find out whether we still have to." If this story has you leaning forward wondering what woke up inside that reactor core, go ahead and hit like on the video. Subscribe if you want more slow-burn deep space mysteries like this one. And drop a comment telling me whether you think it's an ancient guardian, a survivor, or something the galaxy has never seen before. Because Wren Ashcombe is about to find out, and the answer is not what anyone in Threadneedle expects. 3 days later, the Clarion's Reach entered the debris field surrounding the hollow gate, her sensors straining against the black hole's gravitational distortion. And Investigator Rook stood on her bridge watching 41 derelict compact warships drift in slow, silent formation around a wound in space, so vast it swallowed starlight whole. "No active power signatures," reported her sensor officer, a quiet, methodical Vash technician named Erie Sen. "No life signs. No communications traffic. Whatever sent that burst, it's gone quiet again." "Then we find it the hard way," Rook said. "Cross-reference every Rex registry against the original signal's encryption signature. Somewhere in this graveyard is the ship that spoke, and I want to know why." It took them 4 days of careful, methodical surveying, drifting between silent hulls that had once carried thousands of human lives, before they narrowed the source to the Meridian's promise, her ruptured spine visible even at a distance. And Rook made the decision, against the explicit caution of half her crew, to board her personally. She found the reactor gallery exactly as Wren had left it 3 days earlier, dark, cold, undisturbed, except for one detail that made Rook's 4 eyes narrow with sudden focus. Fresh scuff marks in the accumulated dust along the deck plating, boot prints human-sized, no more than a few days old. Someone had been here recently, someone alive. She stood very still in that dead reactor gallery, feeling the weight of 4 decades of institutional certainty crack open beneath her feet, and activated her suit's recorder. Log entry Investigator Esthala Rook. Physical evidence strongly suggests recent human presence aboard the derelict vessel Meridian's Promise. I am formally requesting the Concordance suspend all further action on the Sol Compact Extinction Declaration pending further investigation. Whatever we assumed happened out here 40 years ago, we were not looking closely enough. There are survivors, and I intend to find them." She did not have to search long. Ren, watching from a concealed observation post 2 kilometers away, one of the small automated sentries Threadneedle maintained throughout the debris field precisely to monitor for exactly this kind of intrusion, saw the Concordance vessel's shuttle dock with the Meridian's promise and felt her pulse hammer against her ribs. "Owen," she said into her comm, "they found the boot prints. They know someone was here." The response came back tight and urgent. "Options Ren fast." She looked at the small, sleek Concordance shuttle attached to the derelict cruiser's hull, thought about 4 decades of silence, thought about her father's hands and a colony full of children who had never once seen open sky. "I go talk to them," she said, "before they come looking on their own and find something they misunderstand." "Lorenz, Zoen, if I don't, they will keep searching, and eventually they'll find Threadneedle whether we want them to or not. Better they find one person willing to explain than a colony that looks like it's hiding something." The silence that followed lasted 3 full seconds. "Anand and I are coming with you. You are not doing this alone." The meeting that followed, in the cold, dead reactor gallery of a ship that had once carried Ren's own countrymen into a war none of them survived, would later be described by historians on both sides as the true beginning of what came to be called the reintegration. Though none of the 4 people present that day, 2 humans and 2 Concordance officials, felt anything so grand in the moment. What they felt was fear, carefully controlled, and a kind of desperate, cautious hope that none of them entirely trusted. "You're human," Rook said, when Ren finally stepped into the gallery's amber emergency lighting, hands vis. "Ibly empty, moving slowly the way you approach something you're afraid might bolt. You're actually human, alive." "My name is Ren Ashcombe," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "And yes, we're alive, all of us. About 3,000 of us hiding in a colony we built 40 years ago close enough to this black hole that your sensors can't find us. We've been here the entire time." Rook stared at her for a long moment, processing, and then did something Ren had not expected from an official representative of a government that had, 72 hours earlier, been 30 seconds from formally erasing her species from galactic law. She sat down, right there on the cold reactor gallery deck, and put her head in her hands, and Ren realized with a jolt of surprised recognition that the alien investigator in front of her was not hiding triumph or suspicion. She was grieving in advance for a mistake her own government had very nearly made. "We were going to declare you extinct," Rook said quietly. "In front of the entire galaxy, we had the paperwork finished. The broadcast was the last formality." She looked up. "Do you understand what that would have meant? Every claim to your systems, your technology, everything the Compact ever built would have been legally reassigned as unclaimed territory. Your homeworld, everything, gone not because you were dead, but because we decided it was easier to believe you were." Ren felt something twist painfully in her chest, an old grief finding new, unexpected shape. "We thought you'd stopped looking because you thought whatever destroyed us might still be out here. We were hiding from you as much as from it." "What is it?" Rook asked, and Ren heard, underneath the careful diplomatic phrasing, genuine urgent need. "Whatever caused the cascade, do you know?" Ren exchanged a long look with Dr. Anand, who gave the smallest nod, the kind that carried 40 years of careful, guarded consensus behind it. "We think we do," Ren said slowly. "But you need to understand something first. It's not what your archives probably assume. It never attacked us out of malice." Over the following hour, in the dead reactor gallery of a ship that had once been a symbol of compact military strength, Ren told investigator Rook a story that Threadneedle had pieced together over 4 decades of desperate, careful research, using fragments recovered from dying survey logs, damaged black boxes, and the fading, unreliable memories of the handful of people who had actually been present during those final catastrophic days before the cascade began. The expedition that had ventured into the Hollow Gates Shadow 42 years earlier had not found a weapon, or a hostile alien fortress, or any of the grim possibilities the Concordance's cautious archives had speculated about for decades. They had found a guardian, an ancient artificial intelligence of staggering age and sophistication, built by a civilization that predated even the oldest Concordance member species by a margin so vast that human researchers, at the time, had struggled to even properly date the structure housing it. Its purpose, as best Threadneedle's researchers had eventually reconstructed from fragmentary evidence, was singular and absolute: to prevent any spacefaring civilization from disturbing whatever lay at the true heart of the Hollow Gates gravitational well, a structure the Guardian's own archived logs, painstakingly decoded over years by Threadneedle's small dedicated research team, referred to only as the Seed. Nobody in Threadneedle knew, even now, exactly what the Seed was, but they had learned, through decades of careful, respectful, cautious study conducted from a safe distance, the Guardian itself seemed to tolerate what it was not. It was not a weapon. It was not, whatever the initial catastrophic encounter 42 years ago might have suggested, an entity motivated by conquest or malice at all. It was a caretaker, ancient beyond comprehension, and it had reacted to the Compact's original expedition, an aggressive, poorly coordinated military-scientific incursion that had attempted, according to the surviving mission logs, to forcibly breach the Guardian's outer defenses in pursuit of what Compact Command at the time believed was a potential weapons cache, not with an act of war, but with an act of overwhelming, indiscriminate self-defense. A cascading technological quarantine designed to disable any threat to the Seed by unmaking, comprehensively and without malice, the offending civilization's capacity to threaten it further. It had not been trying to destroy humanity.